Welcome back, mighty Vandals, to Tubs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined today by brave, bold, Brian Marceau.
You guys, I got to say, I'm struggling a little bit. We all heard the devastating news yesterday. Ed McCaffrey's not coaching at Northern Colorado anymore. My Saturday Twitter material is taking a pretty significant hit for next year, so I'm in research mode. But otherwise, dude, things are going well.
Brian's obviously joking. The most disappointing news of the week is that the NCAA 14 successor EA Sports College Football has been delayed until summer 2024. However, there is a chance that FCS teams will be included. That was mentioned in the report. So if there's anybody younger than maybe the three of us that are looking to get their hands on the Vandals in video game form, who am I kidding? I still play NCAA 14. Anyways, last but not least, producer, seducer, Marten Heemstra.
It's nice to be here, and it's like, holy shit, it's not a fucking season recap show this week, which is nice.
Exactly. Marten leading us right in here to Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Idaho made the playoffs, guys, not only in the first year of the Jason Eck era, not only recovering from 4 pretty awful years of the Big Sky with Paul Petrino just continuing to not win any meaningful games, and somehow everything broke Idaho's way. It was not guaranteed they were going to get in. They got in. Brian, immediate thoughts?
Yeah, I was watching the FCS Fans Nation live stream instead of the ESPN broadcast. Reason why is honestly with the teams we care about, local podcasters are significantly more informed than national media figures. But I'm sitting there watching the teams get called. Idaho gets called. Look, Montana gets called as being in before Idaho. And after Montana was called, honestly, about 70% of the bracket or 75% of the bracket had been announced. I was getting pretty anxious, thinking like, okay, it happened. Like Montana got in and Idaho is going to get fucked, even though Idaho beat Montana. Then Idaho's called immediately. Find out we're on the road, but I don't give a shit at that point. Just stoked as hell that we're in the first year of Jason Eck's time, and we didn't need to temper expectations. They're in the playoffs, man. Fringe playoff is a kick-ass place to be first year, and Idaho made it. We'll get to the draw in a second, but things are looking pretty good for Idaho's playoff situation. And then I guess just to me, making the playoffs is a huge symbolic victory for a team trying to turn it around. Idaho got the victory. Next question is, can we get through round 1? But man, that was the most anxious I'd been, honestly, in terms of just typical anxiety relating to the team. Easily most anxious I'd been all season, because I really wanted, selfishly, to watch the game. I wanted Idaho to get in, but also to reward the kick-ass effort of the team and coaches, and they got it.
Yeah, honestly, this is crazy to think about from where this program was a year ago. Paul Petrino had just been fired. Things looked like they were in disarray. The team getting blown out consistently by teams that shouldn't have been blowing them out, punching down to opponents, getting punched in the face by any opponent that could sniff 500. And here we are. I know, obviously, Brian and I came in expecting, hey, if we win 5 games this year, this is a great season. Instead, got 7, got into the playoffs. Couldn't be more thrilled with this. For me, Selection Sunday was nerve-wracking, Brian. We saw Weber State and North Dakota go off the board, and those were the 2 games the 2 places that it was thought Idaho's going to play one of these 2 schools, either in Moscow or go to Weber, go to North Dakota. Those we had thought, from those most informed about the bracketology, those were the 3 places things are most likely to happen. And you see those both go off the board, and I panicked. And then they go to commercial break. They come to the second half of the bracket. They announce Southeast Missouri State at Montana. And then from there, I think you and I both had the same reaction of anxiety spike. Like, did Montana make it in and we didn't? And then I kind of came back to life, like, wait a minute. If Montana got in, there's no way that they left Idaho out. And then obviously the very next team called was Idaho. Unfortunately, it is on the road. Brian, what was your thought to this game being on the road?
Initially surprised, because we'd been told Idaho put together a very competitive bid. Maybe our source was wrong. That's entirely possible. Southeast Louisiana it's a school that's not as wealthy as Idaho in terms of endowment. Now, endowment doesn't translate 1-to-1 to athletic budgets, but Southeast Louisiana Stadium holds about 7,000 ish. Less than half what the Kibbe Dome does. So that just gives you a reference point for potential money gained per game for the athletics department over there. But, honestly, it might be for the best. We're choosing to not talk about, the murders in Moscow because we want this to be a place people can go to do something else. And there's other people who are, police officers who you should pay attention to them, not jackasses with a show. But it's probably best. I think it might be best for Moscow to not be hosting a playoff game Thanksgiving weekend because it'd be pretty empty in the dome for sure. There's other logistical issues with lodging when the Apple Cup is taking place in Pullman that week. So it may be for the best. I was surprised seeing that Idaho had been outbid, but look, the bidding process is imperfect. You saw that with Weber State was just given a home game, even though North Dakota had a higher bid in place than Weber State. But that's a separate topic. The FCS needs to get a couple things together with their playoff selection because it clearly resume itself was a secondary issue in where teams got and where teams were slated. Say an example being Weber State. It seems like they're just gifted a home game because the committee was trying to say, hey, you should have been seeded, but you are not. Okay, well, then give them a fucking seed. But, sorry, shifting back to your actual question. I like Idaho's matchup. It was surprising that Idaho doesn't have a regionally based matchup. But again, Weber was matched up with North Dakota. And by rule, if North Dakota and Weber are playing, the only other Western school to play is Montana, and Idaho and Montana already played. So by FCS rules, we could not play round one. So Idaho gets the gift of a non-regional game. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, honestly, especially when you look at how the bracket ended up. Obviously, you and I did a show last night about your Big Sky. I for anybody that's not aware, I guest spotted on Brian's weekly semi-weekly, sometimes weekly. I don't know how you want to call it.
Mostly
the Big
weekly.
Sky, mostly weekly. There we go. Brian's mostly weekly Big Sky Podcast Network power rankings show. Yesterday we did the awards and honors or dishonors, and something we talked about is a lot of schools feel like they got jobbed, especially Montana State getting the 4 seed and most likely going to get Weber State as their second round matchup. Like that's an absolute kick in the teeth for a team that probably thought, hey, we should have a pretty good idea of the path of least resistance to getting back to the national championship game. And then immediately you get a roadblock in Weber State. Idaho didn't get that. Idaho, you obviously have to take care of business each week, and you're not playing a bunch of cream puffs. Like everybody that made it to the playoffs has something about them that means they should be here. You can argue a couple different teams shouldn't have been in and a couple other teams should have been in, but at the end of the day, every team has some sort of claim to be deserving here. If you're looking at Idaho's lineup here, Idaho has Southeastern Louisiana, or SLU is what they brand themselves as. I've always thought of them as SELA. Then they go on to the number 6 seed Samford. For anybody that's curious about Samford, the winner of Idaho's Southeast Louisiana goes to Samford. That's in Alabama. They throw the ball like crazy. They don't run a ton. They have almost 2,000 more passing yards than rushing yards on the season. So if you're Idaho, obviously you don't want to get caught looking forward, but that second round matchup is mighty tasty for Idaho before the third round would realistically be North Dakota State. And I don't even want to think about that far, Brian. Obviously, we got to take care of business here in week 1. But let's talk about Idaho. Obviously, Giovanni McCoy did not play last week. He was named for the Jerry Rice Award, the 25 finalists, I think, for the award this week. We have reason to believe that Vonnie's injury is not quite what it seems. We don't know. It's up in the air. I know X said in the press conference after the game that if they had to absolutely play Vonnie, they would have. It just was more of a precautionary thing. But do you believe that, Brian? Is there a little bit of a chance that we see somebody else this week?
I think for sure there's a chance we see Jack Lane. My understanding is Giovanni's issue is knee related. We all know, look, knee injuries because tendons, ligaments are not vascular. That means their recovery period takes a little bit longer. So if there's any sort of injury that relating to like meniscus, relating to ligaments, those things don't heal in a week. And, keep in mind for Idaho, we know that Idaho State was a shitty team heading in. That was a playoff game for Idaho. That was a must win. And we didn't see Giovanni McCoy, likely second team All Big Sky quarterback, suit up for that game. I'm under the assumption that until we know for a fact Giovanni's not playing, until we know for a fact Giovanni is playing, as a Vandal fan, I'd expect to see that it is going to be Jack Lane, because again, knee issues are a big deal. And that last week that we joke about Idaho State, if Idaho doesn't win that game convincingly, or if Idaho doesn't win the game at the very least, there's no prayer Idaho makes the playoffs. Vandals had to have a good impression at the end, but the coaching staff has a ton of confidence in Jack Lane. We saw last week, honestly, a more diverse set of pass plays called throughout the game. So obviously coaching staff's okay with that, but that's where I am on Saturday, is until I'm told for a fact McCoy's headed out there, I expect he's not.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I would probably think Jack Lane is more than likely. If I had to bet money on it right now, I would bet that Jack Lane is the guy we see trotting out there on Saturday. It obviously had some rookie mistakes, true freshman mistakes that you expect to see. I mean, even Vonnie had a couple of those last year. Vonnie's numbers last year did not look good. Obviously, a completely different offensive system and a coach that didn't know what the hell he was doing at really any point in much of his 9 years here. Obviously, there's one large outlying bowl game, and then everything else was kind of just meh to bad. So you take that with a grain of salt, but we've seen true freshmen before. We've seen what they can grow into. I think the coaching staff obviously has something they like in Lane, but the fact that he has climbed to what seems to be the number 2 quarterback, obviously getting the start in the wake of McCoy.
Seems to be number 2. What do you mean seems?
I mean, I'm always curious because he's not ever listed as number 2 on the depth chart. So it's all this gamesmanship that is so difficult to read through sometimes.
Well, okay, not trying to annihilate the subjects. I know you have a point you're getting to, but just for listeners who maybe aren't, cued in with some of the people we are, he's number 2. Again, we just said this was a playoff type game. What, you think X going to start number 4?
No,
in a
more of
win game.
So I guess we'll derail this whole train. The reason I hesitate to call him the number 2 is because I'm thinking about it as, if Idaho wins this game with Jack Lane at quarterback, do they play Jack Lane again next week? If they do, and if they win that game, you have now played Jack Lane in 4 games. Is he still your number 2, or even at that point your number 1 if Vonnie was healthy and you're picking between the two? Or do you say, hey, he's played his 4 games, we don't burn the red shirt? That's why I leave the ambiguity. For all intents and purposes, yes, Jack Lane is the backup quarterback. Jack Lane is the number 2 guy in the room right now. That is undisputed.
Okay, so to clarify real quick, what you're saying is the reason why you're speaking as though it's not clear is because there is a potential future in your mind where we're not sure if he's going to play. But of course, we haven't reached that potential future yet. So right now, you accept, yeah, dude's obviously number 2.
Exactly. Dude's obviously number 2. But again, if we're talking football here in 2 weeks from now, if Jack Lane plays in both of those next 2 games, then I do think it's a question that's worth having. So that's why I speak with a little bit of ambiguity, because I never know. Again, we all thought CJ Jordan was going to be the guy this year. And then, I mean, Vonnie started in the spring as one of the lowest guys on the totem pole, got himself up to the starter by the beginning of the spring. It's been a little bit of gamesmanship, a little bit of just unsure. So that's why I speak in that generality. I don't even know where the hell that point was originally going, Brian. So I'm just going to pass it back over to you.
My bad, dude.
You're fine.
Anyway, the discussion we're having is, hey, who's going to be playing? We both agreed that until we find out for sure that Giovanni McCoy's out there, we just assume he's not, and how that's going to impact Idaho heading into Southeast Louisiana, which, I mean, that this is one of the things I'm just stoked about this matchup from the Idaho perspective, whether it's Vonnie or Lane, because Idaho didn't get that regional matchup. A lot of people, conventional wisdom was Idaho would play Weber State, and I can tell you, I feel a lot better about Idaho starting Jack Lane against Southeast Louisiana than I would feel about Jack Lane starting against Weber State or even North Dakota, for that matter. I mean, you were talking about the draw before I derailed you and the potential future this team has. Vandals have to win this first game, but look, Idaho's going to avoid, their bracket has them avoiding heavy hitters in the FCS until the final 8, which that'd be North Dakota State, very likely for Idaho if Idaho wins to playoff games. We'll worry about that problem when we get there. But Idaho is now in. Honestly, if you run through the bracket, who would you even rather have Idaho be playing right now? That's not to shit on Southeast Louisiana. They're every team in the playoffs is good, but what you'd rather have maybe Idaho play Davidson first round? I don't know who else in the entire bracket that I like better as a matchup for Idaho relative to what Idaho does well and what Idaho, is going to have to recruit to improve.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't think there's a whole lot of teams that I would have preferred over Southeast Louisiana or Southeastern. I keep doing that. Southeastern Louisiana. There's too many goddamn syllables in that name. Davidson, like you're right. I would think that would be a pretty heavy matchup in favor of the Vandals, but I truly could not be happier with this draw, Brian. This is, if you're a Vandal fan, obviously, we're talking all this up, and in my typical fashion, I'm talking all positive here, and then we're going to get into the preview of Southeastern Louisiana. We're going to be continuing to be positive, and then the game's not going to go anywhere near the way that we think it is, because it seems to be how things go for me when I talk positively about Idaho. But just looking at this on paper, Brian, this is the exact place that you want to be in this bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. Relative. Yeah, maybe this is time we jump into previewing the game. But for Idaho, we've throughout the season, it's pretty clear the kind of teams Idaho struggles the most with. It's teams that are going to beat you up both offensively and defensively in the trenches, and teams that are better at running the football right now, just based off size, based off talent on the team. Idaho's better or more effortlessly comfortable against teams that can't bruise you like UC Davis or Sacramento State. But does okay against teams who want to air it out a little bit. Look, I know Eastern Washington sucks, but offensively, Eastern was fine. And Idaho sure as hell made Eastern look pretty bad passing the football. There's other teams that happen to. Idaho led the Big Sky in interceptions. That's clearly, if you're going to play a team who's good at something, which you're going to in the playoffs. Again, no team sucks who made the playoffs. I'd much rather have Idaho be matched up against a team like Southeastern Louisiana. Additionally, this is part of what makes Southeastern Louisiana a wild card for Idaho. Is they're not out of one of the Southeastern Louisiana is not out of one of the Power 2 or Power 3 conferences if you count the Colonial Athletic along with the Big Sky and the Missouri Valley. And look, those teams, of course, can be solid, but they're not tested week in, week out the way Big Sky teams are, where look, even a team like Portland State that finished middle of the pack, Big Sky, very often you throw a team like that in something like the Ohio Valley, and Portland State's going to look like a team flirting with the playoffs. And look, Portland State was certainly not special relative to the Big Sky. So, those are kind of the first two phases how I would look at for what Idaho's matchup is look, Southeastern Louisiana certainly can score. They can certainly move the ball. But they're not there. There's no reason at this point to think they're the kind of team that's just going to have, they don't have Cameron Scadaboo. They don't have the line that Sacramento State has. Yes, they have a 2-quarterback system that you'll probably hit on in a second, but they very likely don't have an athlete like Asher O'Hara, who, torpedoes most average game plans and can also pass the ball relatively well. In addition to the skill position players a team like Davis and Sacramento State had.
Yeah, so, Brian, I think this is a great time for me to just give a dump of information for anybody that has no idea where the hell Southeastern Louisiana is other than the state of Louisiana. So they went 8-3 this year, 5-1 in the Southland Conference. They had a close win over the then number 4 Incarnate Word, who ended up as the 7 seed in the bracket this year. And they had a close win over McNeese. They had losses to FBS, Louisiana Lafayette, and FAU. They had blowout wins everywhere else on the schedule, except for their homecoming loss to Texas A&M Commerce in their first year as an FCS school. Texas A&M Commerce did not do the Idaho FBS to FCS. This is not like some offshoot of the SEC Texas A&M school. This is one of their satellite campuses moving up from Division II, playing their very first year in the FCS, and they knocked off Southeast Louisiana. So not great there. Head coach Frank Selfo, he's 33-22 in 5 years. He's made the playoffs 3 times in the last 4 years. They've finished top 25 in 3 of the last 4 years, 4 years in a row if you count this one. So 4 of 4, assuming they don't get blown out to the point that they drop out of the top 25. Last season they were 9-4. They won a playoff game. They beat Florida A&M, who is historically not great, and then got boat raced by JMU, lost by 39 in the second round. Again, just dumping a bunch of information here, but the big thing I want to point out is the mutual opponents with the Big Sky. The one Brian had harped on to me when I was starting to do all the research for this is they beat Northwestern State 23-7 in their second to last game of the year at home. Northwestern State lost to Montana 47-0. So if you're looking at just the different wins that they have compared to those teams playing other Big Sky schools, not a great sign there for the Southland Conference. Their other two mutual opponents, McNeese, they beat 28-17, who lost to Montana State 40-17. And then, Brian, this is the big one, so we can segue to the actual news of the day. They beat Lamar 47-31. Lamar lost to Northern Colorado 21-14 towards the beginning of the year. So we're talking about a school that, yes, they got Lamar by 16, but Lamar got beat by Northern Colorado. They got Edded. Ed couldn't win more than a couple games. Ed was a terrible coach. You see all these things coming out on Twitter about how sometimes he just didn't even coach at halftime. He just went and sat in a room for 20 minutes until it was time to go back out for the third quarter. That team lost to Northern Colorado.
Now that's part of what makes me feel relaxed about this game. You know, McNeese State is another team that Southeastern Louisiana played very close, like you said. Beat Southeast. I'm going to call them SELA. I'm sick of the 9,000 syllables. SELA beat McNeese State 28-27. Montana State walked all over McNeese State first week of the season, 40-17. I will say the couple games that give me pause here are, I mean, the big one for sure is the Incarnate Word win, but also beating Jacksonville State 31-14. Jacksonville State finished, I believe they finished like 9-2. They're not eligible for the playoffs because they're moving up to FBS and not that long. So look, there's certainly reason. Look, you see the resume and a couple good wins like Jacksonville State and Incarnate Word. That explains why this team made the playoffs. In addition, just the overall record. But man, like Northwestern State was terrible, and SELA wins 23-7. That's kind of a lower scoring game for SELA. SELA scores, they're a pretty solid scoring team. I'm not saying they're precisely Eastern Washington modeled or something like that.
I'm going to jump in very quickly, Brian. SELA scores 33.82 points a game. If you go into the Big Sky, that's between Idaho and Portland State's offenses.
Okay, it's like, yeah, they're pretty, they're a pretty strong offensive team for sure. But you can also see with the McNeese State game and the Lamar game as well. That's why I'm saying I'm happy with this matchup. Is you have the ceiling of being some of the better teams. That Incarnate Word game is probably the most worrying, just because Incarnate Word is seeded at 41-35, putting up 41 points. That's nothing to ignore. But again, like this isn't Weber State. This isn't a Missouri Valley team that, again, just going to harp on this point because I was accused of harping earlier, is the teams that Idaho struggles with are the teams that beat you up. That's not Southeastern Louisiana.
I mean, and I think to really hammer the point home. Oh, that was a stupid pun. To really hammer the point home here, and I'm just going to commit to it. The Southland Conference. So obviously, you have teams that are going to finish above 500 in conference just because you all play the same amount of games. But if you look at the overall records, Incarnate Word and SELA are the only two teams in the Southland that finished 500 or above. Texas A&M Commerce actually finished 5-6. I didn't look at their full schedule. I think they played Tennessee Tech, and I think they played Lincoln like Portland State did. So there's some garbage games on that schedule. But when you look at the Southland Conference, like there's nobody there that did anything other than Incarnate Word and SELA. So you don't have the iron sharpens iron. You don't have teams smashing into each other every week and getting more physical and getting better that way. You had a bunch of junk. It's just a bad conference, a couple decent teams or good teams from that conference. But I'm just not too worried about them, Brian. Like you said, there's the 2 quarterback system. it's not Sac State.
Well, and
it's certainly not.
Sagarin would agree with what you just said. Look, we don't obsess over analytic metrics, but it's not a worthless thing to look at. Just have a reference point for theoretical talent. Sela in Sagarin is rated 142, which is 29 spots below Idaho. It would, if Sela's in the Big Sky with that rating, they're the number 17 team, significantly below Idaho, a little bit above Northern Arizona. So yeah, the metrics say this is a team that's around a little bit better Northern Arizona level. But look, the rest of the conference, it's a huge drop down. The number 3rd ranked team is McNeese State, who we already talked about sucking, at 209. 209 in the Big Sky would put you at 4th to last, slightly worse than Portland State, just barely better than Cal Poly. That's the weekend, and that's the second best team in the conference. That's the week in, week out kind of games these teams have played. This is honestly the same discussion that happens at the FBS level when you're talking about, hey, how would a Mountain West team do playing in the Big 12 or something like that? And it's a reasonable thing, but this time it's in favor of Big Sky schools to say Big Sky teams are tested. Even not that great Big Sky teams would be thought of as pretty solid in some of these smaller conferences like the Southland. That's why Big Sky schools, Missouri Valley schools, always have the strongest strength of schedule in the Big Sky, and that's what helps us come playoff time, because even the teams that we, during the tone of our season, don't think of as that challenging, talent-wise in the FCS, they actually are.
So, Brian, speaking of talent, let's get into some of the guys that we should know from Sela. We are about half hour into the show, and we haven't really talked about them at all. We've given the 30,000-foot view, but we haven't really given any insight. The biggest thing for me is that I have no idea what the hell is going on with this team. None at all. They're starting running back from last year, Taron Jones. He was all-conference second team, preseason all-conference this year. Had a great season last year. He has 18 carries this year in 11 games. He has made an appearance in 11 games, supposedly, according to their stats. He has made 18 carries. So for whatever reason, Taron Jones just not playing anymore after being all-conference running back last year. This year, their leading rusher is Carlos Washington Jr. He has 586 yards and 11 touchdowns, has 123 receiving yards. There's a couple more seniors below him. Basically, they have 3 different guys that all have about 70 carries or more, nobody more than Washington's 124. They're very much committee based. There is no scataboo on this program. Again, they run the ball a ton, but they keep those 3 guys kind of just fresh, moving in and out. Again, like you said, the 2 quarterback system. Cephas Johnson III is their running quarterback. He's their second leading rusher on the team with 419 yards and 3 touchdowns. He does throw a lot more than Asher O'Hara does, so this is not the Sac State system. Johnson has 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions through the air. And then their redshirt freshman pocket passer has 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. The biggest thing for me, and we'll speak about the receivers in just a minute, but the biggest thing for me when I was looking at this, Brian, they have a bunch of offensive linemen injured. 3 of their opening day starters are gone. Their left tackle, he was a all-conference guy last year, went out with injury in the first game of the season, so they have a sophomore back that's playing for him. Their left guard, he is all-conference. Again, this is the Southland. It's eight teams. It's not like a huge conference, so it's not quite as glamorous as getting all-conference in the Big Sky, where there's so much more competition. Then they have a bunch of sophomores and freshmen playing across the line, and those freshmen and sophomores, one of them has started every game this season. The other guys have only starting in the last 6, 7, 8 games, because they have had linemen going down with injury. Their offense just doesn't scream terrifying to me just yet, Brian.
You mean, say again? I'm gonna echo what you're saying. The running back by committee is something Vandal fans have seen for sure. You'll look at the quarterback numbers. You combine the 2 quarterbacks, it's 21 touchdown passes to 6 interceptions on the season with the 2 quarterbacks combined. So the team's not, when they move the ball, when they pass, they've been solid. But this is something we knew heading into this game is Sela's more their relative strength. Now you're going to get to defensive relative strength in a second, but broadly speaking, this is a team that's probably a little bit stronger offensively than defensively. Again, coming from the Big Sky, this will be a barometer for us because Big Sky quarterback play is not as strong this year as it has been, for the last 4 years or so. But as far as teams, rushing the football, Sela can rush the football. They've got a handful of guys who can. Honestly, that kind of reminds me of Montana State, only in the delegation of who rushes, kind of like Idaho. But I just don't think this is a team that's going to be able to produce in the same way, because I've talked a lot today about the teams that dominate the trenches, the teams that Idaho is just not yet equipped to handle. It's a completely different comparison going against a Southland schedule where, you talk about handling, Sela did great against a team like Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word is they're certainly in the Eastern Washington mold of they score the good Eastern Washington mold of they score a ton and give up a ton, which explains a 41-35 game there. But I guess that's kind of what I'm looking at as my barometer is they certainly weren't able to push around Incarnate Word, but they were able to score. So look, we know they're strong. But I guess the tone, I'm just not able to get out of this tone, Dallas, of I know they're solid. I'm just not that worried yet.
I'm hoping this goes differently than the last time you and I talked about not being that worried, because we talked about UC Davis not being that worried, and we were completely wrong with that. Hopefully that's not the case. But again, there's a bunch of guys injured. They don't have one quarterback that's taken the reins. Like, I know that the two quarterback system can work at this level, but it doesn't scream anything to me. It's running back by committee. The guy who was the stud last year isn't there. Like, you take Ulonzo Gilliam off of UC Davis, and I don't know if Land Larison takes them to the same offensive heights that they've had. There's nobody like that on Sela. They do have a receiver who's very good, Gage Larvidan. He was their 2021. This is the Southland Conference's 2021 Freshman of the Year. First team kick returner, second team receiver. The guy is an all-purpose weapon. Leads the team in catches and yards. 45 for 582. But then their third leading receiver left the team this week. I can't figure out why. There's nothing about it. But all of a sudden, they had one guy start almost every single game. He's their third leading receiver. And he's not listed on the depth chart, and he's completely just gone from the roster. Everywhere that they publish the roster, he's just gone. So it's tough to feel terrified by this team. I know that they score in bunches. Again, they hung with Incarnate Word, but when you're talking about a team that doesn't have they're doing the death by 1,000 cuts running back system. The two quarterbacks, again, if you put their numbers together, pretty solid, but not necessarily spectacular. The tight end does have 6 touchdowns, but he has 13 receptions for 200 some yards. Nothing crazy there. You're down 3 offensive linemen. I just don't see anything on the offensive side that scares me. Now, the defensive side, Brian, it does. There are a couple things that scare me there, but offensively, I just don't see. I don't see anything like terrifying me that Idaho's going to get into a shootout that they might not be able to hang with. I just don't see that happening.
No, and I got to steal a little bit of your research here. I think the thing you're talking about as being, what scares you about this team is specifically the secondary, where cornerbacks, just defensive backs overall, clearly the relative strength of Sela's defense. You talking about 2021 All Southland first team, AP All American third team sophomore Zy Alexander, reputationally one of the best corners in the country. 24 tackles, 2 picks this year, 4 pass breakups. On the other side, you've got senior Fernando Jordan. Forgive me for stumbling. I've never heard of a Fernando before. He's a former AP All American third teamer and All Southland talent. 22 tackles this year, 5 pass breakups. You look at the safety; they've got another all conference performer from last season in Donnell Ward McGee, he's a field safety, 50 tackles, 2 picks. So there certainly is talent in the secondary. In particular, with the tone of the conversation we had of, look, if Giovanni McCoy is playing, that's one thing, but until McCoy's playing, look, again, for me personally, when I see McCoy out there, that's when I'll believe it. If it's Jack Lane out there, this is going to be a very different challenge than the dumpster fire Idaho State was. And Lane had moments where he looked like a true freshman in his first start. This was mercifully not his first start, but this is going to be a challenge far different than what Lane had against Idaho State. Never mind that there's just no way that Lane has more time in the pocket against Southeastern Louisiana than he did against Idaho State, because Lane went virtually untouched in the pocket for the entire game. I mean, the only time he almost got sacked, the Idaho State player completely whiffed on the sack. So I guess that to me is the part that has me kind of pausing, is I'm not that anxious about Rob Borisch and co. having good effort against Sela defensively. It's that if you're going to jump on Idaho, one of the ways you try to do it is disrupt a true freshman in his second start. And Sela probably does have the secondary talent to do that.
Yeah. And you didn't even mention, Brian. So their boundary safety is the only position in the secondary that they don't have an all-conference talent at. They have their star position, sort of like the nickelback, just the fifth DB that sometimes it's called rover, sometimes it's called star. He was also honorable mention last year. He's third on the team with 69 tackles. He's got a bunch of tackles for loss, a couple sacks, a couple interceptions.
Well, that's 69 tackles. That's All-American, no question right there. I hope they sit him.
I would hope so too. I mean, just level that out. He's got a good, nice year for him. But so there's that. The secondary is very good. The biggest thing that terrifies me, Brian, is that their best defensive lineman has not played all season. He started playing again 2 weeks ago. He already leads the team in sacks after playing just 2 games. Bryce Cage is his name, sophomore defensive end. Expect him to be the guy wrecking the most havoc. Again, assuming he's able to play. I don't know what his snap count has looked like. I didn't go back and watch the film like that. I'm sorry, guys. Wasn't going to commit to that level of research for this team. But again, the guy has played the last 2 weeks and already leads the team in sacks. It's only 3, but still 3 sacks in 2 games when nobody else on that team was getting consistent pressure. That is really concerning. They've got some other like honorable mention guys at defensive tackle and one of their ends. I think he's more of a run stopper, but it's not for all the injury problems they have on the offense. They are getting their best defensive player back like right here for the playoffs, which is always terrifying.
Which, to throw a little asterisk here, defensively in the Southland, Sela is middle of the pack. They rank number 4 in total defense, scoring defense. Sela ranks number 3 at 24.7 points per game allowed. The team that stands out in that conference is Incarnate Word, which is they're just a different animal, which Idaho doesn't have to play. Although Sela beat Incarnate Word, so I guess that's maybe a singular thing to point to about how even if I'm not anxious about this team, Sela's good. You don't make the playoffs without being good. Pass defense, bringing up pass defense because we just talked about the overall talent on that team. Sela was still they're the number 4 overall defense in the conference. So like they were giving up yards, absolutely, but they were the number 2 team in the conference in interception. Not in interceptions. Good luck. Those touchdowns. They're the number 2 team in picks, picked off 8 passes in 6 conference games, which actually stats at a per game basis, not that different from what Idaho was able to do in the Big Sky. So, point taken, Dallas, that you brought up is, I don't think Sela's going to offensively be able to boat race Idaho in any way. They've got talent on the other side of the ball. They've got the talent to make this a close game. I don't think Idaho loses to Sela in a blowout. And I think Idaho could win in a blowout. But if this game gets close, if we have a few turnovers, Sela has the talent to do that. That's what they've been doing to the teams in their conference.
And that's the one thing. The one thing that is going to be so tough to predict about this is I think this feels to me like an Idaho, what Idaho's offense has been all year long. We're going to try to run for 250 yards. We're going to try to control the ball for 40 minutes of the 60 and hope that that's how we beat you. Now, they do allow 155 yards a game rushing, which, again, in the Southland, that might mean Idaho's got a heck of a lineup here, guys. And again, everything looks great on paper, but I'm trying to find a way to talk myself down from thinking that Idaho is gonna pretty handily win this game. I'm not calling it a blowout, but I just looking at every phase of this, it feels. I mean, maybe other than special teams, they do actually have a pretty good kicker, and their punter, I guess, was all conference as well. So maybe their special teams might be better than Idaho's, but I just don't feel like Idaho is outmatched offensively or defensively. I'd have to give Idaho favor in both of those phases of the game.
Yeah, no pushback whatsoever. Wikipedia just did not help me in contextualizing Sela in the playoffs. Last time I remember seeing Sela in the playoffs was 2019, matched up against Montana, and Montana dominated one. Like they scored about 56 or something like that, which that's a few years ago. So obviously the rosters have turned over.
That was the second year of their current head coach.
Second year of their current head coach. Okay. That's kind of the thing that's popping in my head, is just remembering the last couple of times we've seen Big Sky schools play non-Missouri Valley teams, non-Colonial athletic teams, or non-JMU Colonial athletic teams in the playoffs. This is the time now for us to kind of be happy about the Big Sky schedule and how rough it is, because if you come out of a Big Sky season with a winning record like Idaho did, you're just not going to do that and not have faced the kind of talent that's it's not the same in the Southland. It's not the same in the OVC. It's a different world in those conferences. In the past, it was different, but some of those conferences are the ones that have been decimated the most by, the last few decades of Southern teams leaving for the FBS. That's, part of what the Southland used to be a very strong conference. Then they lost, half the conference to the Sun Belt, and the Sun Belt's a good conference in a solid G5 conference in the FBS now. But I guess, looking at, we talked about the team stats, talked about individual guys. I really think this is a game. It's more Idaho's to lose than it is for Seedless to win.
So breaking news from one of our longest tenured and favorite listeners. We love you all, but Tom Kendall has been with us since damn near the beginning. Tom Kendall jumping in with a weather report. Weather forecast for this weekend, 52% chance of rain and 11-mile-an-hour winds. To me, I hear those and I immediately think, where can I put some money down on the Vandals? Because if you're telling me in everything we've looked at, the strength of the defense for Southeastern Louisiana is their passing defense. Idaho obviously prefers to run the ball very heavily. A windy, rainy game in a fairly humid area. Again, it's going to be roughly 60 degrees that day. If you're telling me it's going to be 60 degrees, rainy, and windy, I'm taking the Vandals every single time.
Yeah, look, I found what I was looking for too about previous playoff matchups in 2019. That the one I referenced, Sela beats Villanova round one. Villanova's not as strong as JMU CAA team. They won that game 45-44, then lose at Montana 73-28. In 2021, Sela beats Florida A&M, another relative to the Big Sky, smaller conference FCS team, then loses to a very good James Madison team 59-20. Now, I'm not saying Idaho would get killed by James Madison if those teams were playing right now. James Madison was a top 25 FBS team their first year up, so that's not to put down Sela. But the last two times in the playoffs, Sela's been matched up with stronger top two conference talent. It's just not the same in those conferences. That's why I feel confident about Idaho heading into this game. Look, Idaho lost by a touchdown to Sacramento State. The only game Idaho really didn't acquit itself that well this season was UC Davis. And look, I think that was just matchup dependent. I don't think Sela's going to be able to do what UC Davis and Sac State did. Those are the only FCS schools that have been able to make Idaho look bad this season. And we just got that favorable weather report, you'd say, from Tom Kendall. So I'm feeling pretty good.
I do want to quickly clarify for you there, Brian. Idaho only lost to Sacramento State by 31-28. You're thinking of Montana's lost the week before.
Yeah, okay, you're right. The point being, single score loss to the number 2 seed team in the entire field, Sacramento State, who look a lot of people believe Sacramento State should have been number 1. That's a separate FCS. We really need to talk about the FCS all team lists in a second, because honestly, the FCS national reporters, national entities are kind of a clusterfuck in a way that I'm a little surprised about. But anyway, look, I don't have much to get here other than how confident I feel about this, with the wild card being if Lane plays. This is a team that's got a good secondary. It's going to be important for Idaho to maybe have a game plan that looks similar to earlier in the season, where Giovanni McCoy didn't quite have the exact same freedom in week 4 that he had in his last start against UC Davis, as far as the kind of pass plays that were being the volume of pass plays that were being called. UC Davis was the only game this season Idaho passed more than it rushed. that's gonna need to not be the case against a team like Sela. You'd have to expect this is the kind of game where Jason Eck wants to sit on the ball, get as close to that 42 minutes to 18 minutes spread that Idaho repeated about 3 or 4 times this season. Or if Idaho needs to get out early, that's the identity of this team. They're better playing with the lead than playing from behind. I think that's the kind of game plan you want. And, one of the best ways to put Jack Lane in a situation where he's successful, which the coaches, to their credit, man, this coaching staff's been kick-ass about putting players, in particular young quarterbacks, in position to do well, getting out to a lead, ideally, running first, probably rushing back. You'd have to expect this is a game Eckenschleister want to rush about 60% of the time and let Lane throw, play action, let him throw when it's a little bit of surprise, just stay the hell away from 3rd and long. And, that's about as good a game plan as Idaho's going to have.
Completely agree. I'm looking for 65, even 70% run the ball. Just the linebackers for Sela are solid. Not necessarily spectacular numbers, but they do have 3 solid linebackers that are probably going to make it a little bit hard to run the ball at times. But this, Brian, you're completely right. I've got no pushback there. This feels like let's commit to just running the ball 40 times. Don't pass it more than 20 and punch it down their throats and hope that's what it's going to take to get it done. Any final thoughts, Brian, on this week's matchup before we pick the score?
No, not really. Although I really got to say, man, that game, that if you look at the Sela schedule, that hops out even more than the 41-35 win over Incarnate Word. I guess this is more establishing that I am convinced that the floor of Sela is miles below the floor of Idaho. That loss that you brought up to Texas A&M Commerce on homecoming, which I know that Texas A&M Commerce, that's first year FCS, they're not Simon Fraser, but that's what I want to read into that game. Looking at the box score here, and that was a game where Sela can be susceptible through the air, like we talked about. But yes, they can pick off passes, but they can certainly be beat. That's a pretty bad team in Texas A&M Commerce that threw for 374 yards, 4 touchdowns. These guys they're not bad. They made the playoffs, but they're not the world beaters that a first round matchup can be, like last year when Davis got matched up with South Dakota State in the first round. This draw to Idaho is probably as favorable as it possibly could be outside of playing Davidson. So just make sure if you're not traveling to Hammond, Louisiana, that you've got your ESPN Plus broadcast up. That's where I'm going to be.
Yeah, Brian, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's tough to really project what this team is, just because for every incredible game that you see, hey, you beat Incarnate Word, you beat Jacksonville State, then you do have that loss against Commerce. I do have to shout out Lion for Life in the comment section, pointing out that SLU played without 10 starters and their starting quarterback. I did notice that they played without the running quarterback. They played with Sawyer instead of Johnson. So that definitely has something to do with it. I don't know if playing without 10 starters, I don't think that was quite the number when I looked at the historical starters, but playing without your starting quarterback, that is a recipe to have a bad loss on your schedule. Not all teams are as lucky as Idaho with backup quarterbacks.
Sagarin would say Texas A&M Commerce is a Cal Poly level team. So Line for Life, thank you for watching. Thank you for the input. I really don't think that the point doesn't matter here about just establishing a floor of a team from the Southland compared to the floor of a better team from the Big Sky. Doesn't mean it won't be a competitive game. Doesn't mean that there aren't reasons that Sela could come away with a win. I guess from my projected outcomes, let's score predictions in a second. I just don't think there's a world where Sela's would blow an Idaho team out. If Sela's going to win, this will be a close 1-score game in my mind. There is a world where a good Big Sky team should be able to beat a Southland team by more than 1 score.
Before we get to picking the scores, if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. You could find Colin Hughes on Twitter right now. Ask him. He's ready to do it. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the middle fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. You could check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire country. Just bring your clothes. HRE will handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Or Colin Hughes is hanging out in the comment thread. If you've got some questions, hit him up. Just saying. All right, guys. We are almost at an hour of this show already. What do we got? Idaho at Sela on Saturday.
I'm going to go Idaho 41, Southeastern Louisiana University 31.
I'm going to go Idaho 35, Sela 24.
We're all kind of in the same boat. I'm thinking Idaho 38, Sela 28, maybe 31, but I'm going to say 28 because I'm going to say that they're going to be in a situation where they don't kick a field goal and they're trying to score a touchdown at the end. But in the comment section, it seems like everybody here saying, hey, everybody in the playoffs is tough. This is not going to be a blowout. We're getting that from both the Sela guys that are in here or SLU. Again, I'm sorry. Always been Sela to me. I'm trying. Captain saying Idaho 38 points, 38-27 for Idaho. Steve Kurtz 42-30. Colin Hughes 37-34. Josh Yon 35-28. Everybody picking Idaho. Obviously, this is an Idaho podcast.
I'm waiting for those Sela guys to throw some scores in. They've been active. It's been fun to have them in the comment thread. We got to get, come on, SLU. We got to get some score predictions from you guys.
Yeah, I would love to see Lion for Life and SLU Lions fan. I would love to read your predictions live here. That way you guys can either make fun of us on Saturday for us being wrong, or we can say, hey, we got it. We actually knew our team a little bit this week, which sometimes doesn't always happen. Taylor Cash, 35-31. Patty Ferks, 40-28. Tom Kendall, 24-21 in overtime. I'm assuming that's Idaho. We did get Lion for Life there, 31-24 Lions. SLU Lions fans saying the same thing, 31-24 Lions. So everybody thinking this is going to be a one-score game or close enough to that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on Idaho Sela, guys, before we move on to the rest of the Big Sky this weekend?
No, more with our small sample size. And again, Line for Life, SLU Lions fan, thanks for jumping on. This is playoff football. If you're not a Pioneer Conference team, both sides should have confidence in what their teams can do. You know, both our fan bases that we have access to right now are saying one-score game, one-ish score game in either direction. This is what, this is why I've been, not to bring up that FCS FBS conversation because we're not going to have it, but this is one of the things, if you're an FCS dude or if you're okay with Idaho in the FCS now, this is one of the things you wanted, is you get to go in the playoffs. You get to test yourself against good teams from other parts of the country. You get to see what a good Big Sky team is compared to a good Southland team is, or a good OVC team is, or a good CAA team. That's the whole point of the playoffs. Idaho's kind of felt like they've been in the playoffs for a while, honestly. Since that heading into this season with the FBS schedule there's only so many losses a team like Idaho can handle and still be playoff eligible. Feel like the team's tested. We're going to find out for sure on Saturday.
All right, let's move forward to the other two games for the Big Sky. Obviously, Sac State is off. Montana State is off, but we do have a couple other schools playing this weekend. We're gonna go right to the sheep right off the bat. SEMO at Montana. Producer, seducer, Marten Heemstra. Who are you picking in this game?
Southeast Missouri will SEMO touchdowns in Montana. Southeast Missouri.
Yeah, I'm going to say this game matters a ton for Montana because I think not only making the playoffs, but being able to pick up a win is going to matter in Bobby Hauck being able to say, look, what I do works. The team just had some injury issues. Real question about whether Lucas Johnson, starting quarterback's going to be able to play. He went down against Montana State, and he's been reporting nerve issues in one of his legs, specifically that the leg's numb. Unclear if he's going to play. It looks like Bobby Hauck has figured out that Danny Britt should be the backup quarterback in place of Chris Brown. If Danny Britt plays, or if Lucas Johnson is healthy, or if Danny Britt just plays as a starter, I'm going to go Montana winning this game. I think Montana's kind of like Idaho, where they're going to say, look, dodged a bullet, not being matched up against a team like Weber. Montana couldn't be, of course, because they played. But I think, for a team like Montana reeling off the Montana State loss, there's going to be a little extra motivation to show that last week is not the final impression of this team.
So we've got SEMO leaving Houck Stadium to go take on Bobby Houck. Unfortunately, I do think Montana wins this game. If this was not in Missoula, maybe it's a slightly different story, but it feels like if Montana is going to keep Bobby Houck around, not that he's coaching for his job here, but he's got to come out and make a statement, at least win a game, and at least fight another weekend. Montana fans are not happy right now with the performance of this team. Brian, like you said, Lucas Johnson, if he's out, you'd hope that Britt is the guy and not Brown. And nothing against Brown. It's just he hasn't shown he's got what it takes. I don't see anything in SEMO's schedule that screams, yeah, this team is going to go out there and beat Montana on the road in what is probably the worst draw for anybody in the first round. It doesn't matter how bad Montana has been at times this season, and their offense has been lethargic at best. I don't think I really would want to be flying halfway across the country to go to Washington Grizzly Stadium when it could end up dumping 3 feet of snow over there. Pacific Northwest winter is not so great for some of those teams in a little bit warmer climates. So,
hey, 10 seconds. I want to hit a comment thread from Brian Kennison saying, why aren't we more concerned about McCoy not playing? That's my understanding. This isn't us breaking news, Brian. This is my understanding is the injury is knee related. So my take is that until I see McCoy playing, I'm going to assume he's not. And the answer to your question is this coaching staff just kicks ass at not asking people to do stuff they're not ready to do. Mm-hmm. This coaching staff is very good and appears to me to be very sensitive in understanding the strengths of their players. We're talking about quarterback right now and trying to call a game that most effortlessly aligns with the strengths of those guys. Also, look, if Jack Lane is as good as the coaches think he is, like we've seen backups on Idaho do well elsewhere. Jabari Gibbs did well at South Dakota State prior to injuries. We've seen CJ Jordan look very good for stretches. So if Jack Lane is at that level of talent, which we saw him at Idaho State look pretty good in stretches for sure. There were some concerning things as well, but there's a lot to like about Lane against Idaho State. Asterisk is Idaho State. That'd be why I'm not anxious yet. But if things go negatively for Idaho, I think the issue will probably be turnovers and probably difficulty at the quarterback position if Idaho doesn't come out on top.
So we're going to just kind of rip the Band-Aid back off here. We're going to go back to SEMO, Montana. So just quickly throwing in some folks in the comments. Cap Dan 24-21 SEMO in overtime. Tom Kendall 28-21 SEMO. Colin Hughes, our favorite sponsor. 27-24 Montana. Well, I mean, I guess technically we have 2 sponsors now. I can't say that anymore because I love both of them equally. They're like my children. And we're going to get to that. Brian's showing off a little bit of the goods here in just a second. Steve Kurtz, Montana rolling 56-10. Colin Hughes, if it's QB2, 24-17 SEMO. Joshua Yon, 17-14 Montana. Basically, none of us know what's going to happen. That takes us to what I think is probably going to be a better game than SEMO, Montana. It's the one I'm more interested in watching, at least. North Dakota at Weber State.
I'm going to go with Weber State.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Weber State too. Weber State, their offense is certainly faded in the second half of the season, but Weber still has a strong enough defense that they don't get blown out. When Weber loses, the games are always close. I just feel that Weber's got a little more talent than North Dakota. Weber has a couple more impressive wins than North Dakota in my mind too. So I'm going to err on Weber State winning. I mean, Weber State realistically should have been a top 8 team based off resume. So I'm going to lean in to just saying North Dakota got a shitty matchup with a team that should have been off this week.
I'm not honestly looking into it even that far. I'm looking at this as what would be the most hilarious thing for Montana State. And it's absolutely if Weber State wins this game and goes on to play Montana State in the next weekend. Bobcat fans are great. I cannot wait to see what their reaction is going to be if/when Weber State wins this game and they they get welcomed into the FCS playoffs this year with a rematch against Weber State. I don't think Weber State wins that game, but it's definitely going to be hilarity in the social media of the Big Sky for the week of Weber State, Montana State Part 2, if they take care of business against North Dakota State, which, again, I believe they will. Patty Frerks jumping in. Weber will win this. Colin Hughes, 38-28 for the Big Sky Conference over the Missouri Valley Conference. Not a whole lot of comments on this one because I think a lot of people are just going to pick Weber State because Weber State, honestly, they probably should have gotten a seed. They're right there on that edge of should have maybe gotten the 8th seed. Steve Kurtz, Weber 17, UND 14. Just feels like a Weber State game, especially where they've got it at home. Feels like Weber State's going to at least get this one and move on to fight another day. With that, we do have our second sponsor, one of our favorite sponsors. Again, we now have 2 of them.
Yeah, guys, Nick Davis is a dude who's helping us out. He does kick-ass metalwork. Marten's holding up a Grumpy Joe creation of Nick's right now, available at the Vandal store. Also can contact Nick about that. We'll get to that in a second. If you jump over to me on camera, producer Marten, once your metalwork goes down, yeah, this is the Flaming Heads. These are officially licensed University of Idaho wall art. I don't know what the hell to call these. Dallas is grabbing his, and I got it. And again, the Tubs at the Club special, Nick Davis special, King Spud. You can only get the King Spud via Tubs at the Club. So, hey, Dallas, if we shift to Dallas, he's got his iVandals logo up. Yeah, that's all Nick Davis's work, man. Nick Davis does only kick-ass work. If you're interested in any of these things, Marten's got the magnet up there too that Nick designed for Tubs at the Club. If you're interested in any of the originals from Nick Davis, get in touch with us on Twitter at Tubs at the Club, or you can also check out Nick Davis on Twitter as well. Should have had his handle up. I'll get that someday. But yeah, Nick Davis helping us out. He helps out. Honestly, Nick Davis is an MVP in fundraising for University of Idaho Athletic Department. He's partnering up with us because we're birds of a feather. Thanks, Nick, for helping us out.
And he's even actually a pretty cool dude, even though he's a 49ers fan. Sorry, Nick, I just had to take that shot. All right, guys. Final thoughts about anything this weekend. Idaho, Sela, North Dakota, Weber, SEMO, Montana, McCoy, Lane. God forbid we talk about the basketball team. Any final thoughts?
Brian, it is hour number 2. Do you want to talk about the other news that happened over the weekend?
You are talking about Ed McCaffrey being shit canned? Or are you talking about basketball?
I mean, 87 Ed, not 86 Ed.
Yeah, 87.
Sorry, really bad.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Ed McCaffrey was fired after 2 seasons at Northern Colorado. Nick Davis in the comment thread, $75 includes shipping for the King Spud option. Man, I'm getting my mind blown by the comment thread exploding. So Jesus Christ, I don't even know what the hell I was talking about. The Nick Davis thing just completely threw me off. Ed McCaffrey fired. Shit canned after 2 seasons. The Northern Colorado fan base, which is not that active in social media, but like their attendance at home games is similar to Eastern Washington. Northern Colorado had better attendance in person in 2021 than University of Idaho had in 2021. So it's not gigantic, but it's not non-existent. They were done with Ed McCaffrey. So this isn't the contract expiring. Ed McCaffrey was fired for sucking. He was fired. I guarantee his comments after the Montana State loss, where he again, the Zach Claus School of Accountability, is Ed McCaffrey has a PhD. It's great news for the conference that Ed McCaffrey's gone. He, of course, in his being fired, did no address to the media because Ed McCaffrey never took this job seriously. It was just a thing to honestly probably feels like it was a hobby for him and a way to improve his son's futures. Did no address to the media, even though media reached out to him. Just posted a man in the arena screenshot, which is, of course, old Teddy Roosevelt's speech that today is universally used by public figures who want to say that there's no way to possibly criticize how shitty they are at everything. So Ed McCaffrey exits the Big Sky Conference. My Twitter thread is going to be devastated because making fun of him and Max sucking week in and week out was a go-to for me, but it's great for the conference. We make fun of North. Whenever I made fun of Northern Colorado, I was making fun of Ed McCaffrey. Fingers crossed for Northern Colorado fans. They get someone in there who knows what they're doing. Ernest Collins, prior to Ed McCaffrey, was reputationally a great guy, a person that the community loved. He just wasn't able to handle the FCS, shifting to the FCS instead of being the D2 power Northern Colorado used to be. Really curious what they get, because Big Sky hires as of late, minus Ed McCaffrey. I mean, Ed McCaffrey at the time was a big name, but the Big Sky's had some pretty dang good hires in the last handful of years, minus Chris Ball, minus Ed McCaffrey. So fingers crossed for Northern Colorado, they get something worth talking about in the future.
And I do want to just quickly point out for everybody, at least for me, the reason we've harped on Northern Colorado so much is because this is the kind of shit I wish somebody would have done when Idaho had Paul Petrino trotting out his son. Mason was a lovely guy. We heard nothing but great things about him. One of the smartest dudes in the room, but probably shouldn't have been playing quarterback for Idaho. This is the kind of thing I wish the media would have picked up on and maybe helped speed things along. Very happy with where we are. Don't think we would have had any of this excitement if Petrino had been removed a couple years ago, but who knows where we'd be. So if you know of any coaches out there that are playing their own kids and hiring their own family members, please contact Brian and I, because we'd love to bring it up on the show, because that shit is just hilarious. All right, guys, we are an hour and almost 10 minutes into this show. I think it's about time to wrap it up. Again, if you like us, if you hate us, if you love us, if you don't care for us, patreon.com/Tubs the Club.
Dallas, instant reaction for you. Jason Eck left off the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year award finalist list, and Robbie Houck from Montana, who has a ton of tackles because he gave up a ton of receptions, makes the Buck Buchanan finalist list, and Hayden Hatton left off the Walter Payton Award list in spite of having better stats than a lot of the wide receivers included, playing in a better conference and missing a game. Thoughts on those three things?
It's the same thought for pretty much all of it. The national media at every level, the national media does not have anywhere near as much of a clue as they probably should. I mean, even if you look at the top 25 votes, there's some people in there that absolutely nail it. Shout out to Theo Lawson, former Vandal. I think his vote looks great every week. There are other people that it's like, did you watch any football outside of the East Coast this year? I think that problem just exacerbates itself as you get to the FCS. It's obvious that a lot of people weren't paying any attention because Robbie Houck makes an award list. Patrick O'Connell doesn't make an award list somehow. Jason Eck is the runaway coach of the year. There is not a single person you could say is the coach of the year this year over Jason Eck. I will fight anybody, maybe not to the death, but at least until there's some blood coming out. Yes, Deion Sanders took Jackson State to an undefeated season. That's been in the works for a while. Jason Eck took over a program. Nobody was showing up to the damn dome. Players were leaving in droves. Players were unhappy with the coaching staff. There were different issues in the legal sphere over the 9 years. You usually don't want to attack a reporter on the sidelines. Paul Petrino left this program in a really bad place, and it took Jason Eck a handful of months to turn things around, and here we are almost a year later. Idaho's in the playoffs. There's no question to me, if you watched Idaho getting blown out by 50 at the end of last year, Jason Eck making this into a playoff team, which again, with almost all the same guys, it's not like this is an entirely new roster that's come in. This is almost the same group of guys that were here last year. That to me is coach of the year right there, turning around a complete disaster program into a playoff team. No question. Should have been the coach of the year.
Yeah, and the Buchanan Award list, Robbie Houck was targeted week in and week out by Big Sky teams because the dude cannot defend wide receivers. He's just not good enough. That's it. He has other things he's good at, but Buck Buchanan Award is for the best defensive player in the nation. You can't have a dude who is the guy picked on by every good team in the Big Sky that could pick on someone. Robbie Houck was the dude. We talked about it on our show with Coulter. That's what you do. Line up, because Bobby Houck wouldn't change where he's lined up his corners. Line up your slots so that Robbie Houck's going to take him on. And if you got Hayden Hatton, if you have any good receiver, they're going to run all over him. That's what Eastern did with Lolo Talimu Jones. There was nothing Houck could do in those games. Houck was obviously targeted those games last year. He was obviously targeted in the Idaho game. But whatever. That's why I brought up when I watched the selection show, I didn't give a shit about the national media for it. Honestly, like the local podcasts right now, especially in the FCS, are much more together with what their individual teams are doing, with what the talent, what the like the progression of the individual conferences are. Those shows, they do their homework. So patreon.com/Tubs the Club helps out with that.
Just one last thing on that, guys. If anybody is missing the scrolling ticker at the bottom, it's Idaho Bangs, #OnlyTubs, patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. Thank you, seducer Marten Heemstra, for that hilarity. Just so anybody is curious, Jack Lane started last week. The Patreons of Tubs at the Club found that out before anybody else. Well, I mean, obviously the team knew about it, but the general public was not aware. We do a very good job of keeping things inside our Discord and inside our Patreon for the few, the proud, the handful of them out there that just love hanging out, talking Vandal sports with us. If you're interested in getting a little bit more news, maybe getting a little bit more discussion time with Brian, Martin, myself, the rest of the folks in the comment thread, check it out, patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. With that said, it's wheels up to Louisiana this week. Go mighty Vandals.
Go Vandals. Go Vandals.